I think it's pretty safe to say that many of us are perfectionists, either overfunctioning perfectionists or underfunctioning perfectionists. And don't worry if you didn't know there were different types of perfectionists. I didn't know either until I started listening to this week's podcast. It's called About Progress, and it helps all of us perfectionists or recovering perfectionists remember that life isn't about perfection, it's about progress. I'm Andy Smiley, the Friendly Podcast Guide. I'm a mom who has used podcasts to fight the boredom and loneliness of motherhood, and now I want to help you find a podcast that can do the same thing for you. It can be overwhelming to try and find a podcast you'll enjoy in the thousands of shows that are out there. That's where I come in. My episodes are short and they answer all of the questions you'll have about the podcast, so you'll know if it's a good fit for you or not. I'm here to help you find a podcast you'll love without wasting your time. Now, let's talk podcasts. Monica Packer, the host of About Progress, describes her show like this. All the self-help extremes out there seem to be designed for perfect robots. But you're a real woman living a real life. About Progress is a podcast and community that's all about progress made practical. The length of each episode varies. There are some episodes that are around 15 minutes long and others that are around 45 minutes long. Before we learn more about the vibe of About Progress, we're going to take a quick break to talk about my podcast consultations. I've been able to talk to some amazing podcasters about their shows while doing interviews for the Friendly Podcast Guide. And along the way, I've learned some tips and tricks on how to start a podcast from the hosts I've interviewed and from personal experience. I've talked to those hosts about what made their launch successful and what made it more difficult. And I for sure know what I would do differently if I could go back and launch my show again. And now I want to share my knowledge with you. I'm offering podcast consults, and I have a couple of spots open in the next month. If you need help nailing down your podcast idea, figuring out your niche, or you have any other podcast questions, I would love to work with you to make your show's launch the best it can be. If you're interested in working with me, fill out the intake form in the show notes. I can't wait to make a podcast plan that is tailored to you and your podcast and will make your launch as smooth and successful as possible. Now we get to hear from Monica as she talks about the list she made that helped her start her podcast and why she still makes a similar list every year. Monica, thank you so much for being on the Friendly Podcast Guide today. I'm so excited to talk about progress. It is such a fun concept and truly something I need as a recovering perfectionist. So before we dive in, though, to your podcast, can you introduce yourself a little bit to my listeners?
Sure. My name's Monica. I currently live in the Salt Lake area with my husband and 5 kids, and I love hiking. People should know that. And I also love baking, both equally. They are 2 big passions of mine.
Okay. But never at the same time. Well,
no, but I guess I could eat my sourdough bread while hiking.
Go. Sure.
And that's a win-win for sure.
That does sound delicious. Okay, we're really off topic. Let's talk about progress. So why did you start your podcast?
This all started as part of an experiment I took on when I was about to approach my 30th birthday. And I had 3 small children at the time. And I was just realizing that all these things I had thought about doing for years, I just kept not doing them. And there was a whole other facet too, of just feeling really stuck in my life and not really knowing who I was anymore and feeling very unfulfilled. And yet I didn't want my life to change. I still wanted to be at that time a stay-at-home mom to my kids. And honestly, that's what needed to be the case for my family too. There was no money for any form of childcare. And I don't want to go back to work as a teacher. So I wanted my life. I just wanted to feel different. And I wanted it to feel more like myself. And so as I was approaching that 30th birthday and I was realizing this is a big milestone and I don't want to feel this way when I turn 40 and 50 and 60. And I think that means things need to change. And for me, that means I need to get off the sidelines of my life. And as I reflected on what was holding me back, a good therapist helpfully pointed out that I was also a perfectionist, which I didn't think I was, because after being an overachieving perfectionist for so long, I became an underachieving perfectionist. And that was my life for the 10 years almost prior to that 30th birthday. And I had to tie that all together, say it's time for me to discover who I am. It's time to explore who that person is. And the way I've got to do that is by learning how to embrace progress for progress sake, for working on things I want to do, not because of outcomes, but because of just leaning in and the fulfillment I can get from them. And I wanted to just start by giving myself permission to be mediocre. So I started a list, what's now known as the do something list in my community, because we do something, not all, not nothing. And as part of that list, there were a bunch of things on there that do not matter and will never matter. And like making 20 new recipes or trying 5 new ice cream shops or going on 5 new hikes in the area, going to an art gallery by myself. But in the process of doing those things and doing them poorly, a couple weird things happened. One is that I weirdly gained confidence, even though I was bad at things. I gained more confidence. The second is that I also gained more of a sense of self. I was able to pick apart like what I liked, what I didn't like, and parse out, this is who I am, and this is what matters to me, and these are my values. And I was able to step more into that in my day-to-day life. And then another thing that happened was a trickle-down effect of, on that list, I had started a blog, and that became like one of those mediocre blogs that nobody read. And I was bad at it, but I still felt like so good learning and growing and like talking about things that mattered to me. And it was all over the place, all over. But as part of that, I had this weird courage and also weird experience behind me to then start a weird podcast about progress. And because I could do it bad, I could do it. And now I've been doing it for almost 7 years. And it's all part of this accidental experiment that changed my life and continues to do so.
That is so lovely. And I know from personal experience that you are helping change other women's lives as they learn to make it about progress instead of about perfection. So thank you from me as a listener. And I'm sure all of your other listeners would love to say thank you too.
That does mean a lot. Podcasting is a weird medium, as you know. It's kind of fun for people who love podcasts. You might be interested in knowing, as a podcaster, you really do feel like you're shouting into the void because you don't get to see reactions. You don't get to, it's very rare that people just like send you an email or a DM or even a review to say, I like this and this changed my life in that way. Like, you don't really know how it's affecting people.
It's true. It's very much like a one-sided relationship. I like, as an avid podcast listener, I didn't understand what it was like to just talk into a microphone in like a corner of your office or whatever and hope that people will listen and not be annoyed by your voice. You know what I mean? So I feel like you touched on it with your like origin story of your podcast, but let's dive a little deeper into what you want people to get out of about progress.
A few things, and it connects a lot to my own story too. And when I was doing my original do something list, some of the pieces of myself that I picked up again included that I love to learn. And also I love to grow. That was what had been missing in my 10 years of underachieving perfectionism. Even though I was staying safer, it felt like, then when I got really burnt out as an overachieving one, I lost so much of myself in that process of being an underachieving one because I wasn't really growing in my personal life anymore. And speaking of Oprah, I was that kid growing up who at 4 p.m. every day was watching Oprah and taking notes and learning and loving that. So what I want women to take away are similar things of what I've taken away from my own growth the past 7 years. And it's, I want them to learn better who they are. I also want them to learn better how to prioritize feeling like themselves and taking care of themselves. And I also want them to not just learn, although that's a big part of it, because we explore so many topics. We learn from so many great people, and I like to teach on there too. I don't want them to just learn. I want them to change. And that's where the practical side of progress comes in. We kind of made a little bit of a pivot 2 years ago almost, where I shifted from just about like interviews and learning from people to being like, no, like, let's actually change. Let's do this in a practical way. It's progress made practical. That's what I want. I want them to take what they're learning and make small changes in their lives that will over time make big differences.
Yeah. It's so interesting that those small changes that feel insignificant they are the ones that make the most change in the long run because we stick with them, right? And so they can actually make the change because you will actually, take those extra 30 steps or whatever whenever you're trying to do something. So 30 actual steps, not like steps in a to-do list or something.
Yes,
that would be way a lot. I feel like your podcast has a very specific vibe, and I would love to hear how you describe the vibe of your show.
When I was originally giving myself permission to make a terrible podcast, I made a lot of mistakes along the way. And you know this as a podcaster because you took my course on podcasting I used to do years ago, and I shared a lot of those mistakes so other women wouldn't make them who wanted to start their own shows. But one of the ones I did not make a mistake about was knowing that I wanted women to feel happy when they listened to the podcast. Now that has evolved in some ways, and it came about like maybe 2 years in. I was trying to pitch someone kind of big on the show, and I was trying to explain what my audience is about and what we do here. And I used this phrase in that pitch email that now gets said every episode and has for years near the end of the episode, where I say, I hope this episode gave you the hug and kick in the pants you need to grow. And that's how I had explained it to the person. This is for recovering perfectionists who need a hug, but they also need a kick in the pants to get going, to try things, to change, to do something, to grow. And that's the vibe I hope they get, that like I feel seen, I feel hope, I feel empowered, and I also feel like I can do this. And I'm ready to take that next step. I'm ready to do something to grow.
Definitely. And kind of just that motivation, but like perspective, like you don't have to do everything all at once, but you should do something, yeah, totally. So I like to ask the hosts when they come on what your favorite episode is. But before you tell me, can you first tell me where can people find you?
My podcast is the best place to go if you're already listening to one. So just go search for About Progress on the app you're already on. I have, as we're recording this, I'm getting close to 500 episodes. And many of those are short. So maybe about a third of them are shorter-ish episodes. So you can go and peruse those and pick up a few that you think match what you want and need and listen to them. I'm also on Instagram at About Progress.
Okay, perfect. I will put the link for your Instagram on in the show notes so that people can go directly there. And just search About Progress, 2 words, in whatever podcast app you're listening to find her there. Okay. Your favorite episode or a couple of episodes, because I know it's hard to choose just one.
It is very hard for me to choose, especially because I have such a
so
huge
many
archive.
Yeah.
I will say in general, the episodes that I feel the greatest honor to have shared are those who have passed away. My guests who have passed away. I had a guest named Christopher Clark. He went for as Topher, short for his name. And I interviewed him right before he lost his voice because he had ALS. And as an actor, his voice had been very important to him, and a director. He lost his voice shortly after we recorded the podcast and then passed away a year or 2 later. So to be able to just like have his voice recorded for his family just meant so much to me. And we had to record that episode broken up because it was just even hard for him. He got exhausted after like 20 minutes of speaking. And so I love being able to share that one. I've also have Kim White from Kim Can Kick It, who passed away from cancer. I had another guest recently who also passed away from cancer, Emily Bell. So just being able to have those kind of episodes for not only their family, but for the whole world, to just be like, it's one of those, I know there's this Latin phrase about like, just, again, this is me kind of losing my, what other words, but postpartum brain here, I apologize, but it's where you're basically like embracing, like, we're going to die. Mortem, something about that. So having those episodes are really a huge honor for me. I would say my very favorite ones, though, I have a couple solos that I love. Um, I just aired one about how to live with purpose instead of seeking purpose. So for all those people are like, what is my purpose? What's my mission? That's one I would encourage you to listen to. But my favorite guest of all time is Dr. Jennifer Finlayson Fife. We've recorded, I think, maybe 8 times together. And the one we just did this year in 2023 aired in January. It has to be my favorite of all the ones we've recorded together, even though the first one we recorded together, my 13th or 14th episode of the podcast accidentally went viral. I did not know how fortunate that was, and it's on perfectionism. But this one from 2023 is about self-expansion. And it has got to be probably my favorite episode. And that's, again, like choosing between children. So I almost feel bad putting that out there, but it's extra incredible.
Well, truly, I feel like my listeners will go and listen to those and then want to listen to more. So you can choose a favorite for today. And we all know that you'll have a different favorite tomorrow, and that's okay.
Yep. That's how it goes.
So because my listeners are mainly moms, I like to ask, is your podcast okay for little ears, or is this one that you want to put like headphones in?
I've always been pretty conscientious that most of my listeners are moms. So we never allow swearing on the show, and most of my podcast episodes are okay with little ears around, but if they're not, I will typically tell you in the introduction. Dr. Jennifer Finlayson Fife, for example, is a sex therapist, and we typically haven't talked about intimacy, but if I have a very specific episode on something like that, I say it in the intro, like, listen to this one with earbuds in. So
totally. Yeah. That's exactly what I need as a mom of littles. I feel like that's all I need. It kind of like wakes me up a little bit. Like, oh, okay, I'll turn that off, or, put headphones in or whatever. Or if I'm in the car with the kids, oh, we'll just skip that one for now and I'll come back later. So
yeah, that always helps.
Yeah, that's all I need. So thank you. Is there anything else that you want to add that we haven't touched on yet?
Interestingly enough, we've talked about the do something list. I actually have a free training on that. It not only changed my life 7 years ago, and I have made one almost every year since, it has changed hundreds of women's lives in our community. And that's a super surprising thing to me. So if women are wanting to know like better who they are and to do so outside of goals and resolution lists, that's where you belong. And they can get a whole free training. It includes a workshop, a workbook, and tons of real life examples from progressors in our community and their DSLs. And you can borrow from them or steal from them and make your own and learn how to make your own. And it's at aboutprogress.com/DSL. And that's Danny, Sam, Leroy.
Perfect. I'll put that in the show notes too, so that along with all of those episodes that you named, because I know that I'm going to go listen to them. So my listeners probably will too. And I'm excited. I know about your do something list, and I make something like it, but I've never done the training. So now I'm going to have to go do that.
Yeah, check it out. Maybe there's just one part of it that you want to add to how you already make your own list.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and sometimes it's just a nice reminder to be like, okay, so why am I really doing this? And like take a step back and like think about it instead of just writing a list really quick. So
yeah. And it's not like it has to be done in January of each year. It's never too late in a year or life to make a DSL.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing a little piece of your life so that we can all become better and just have better lives and feel more fulfilled.
I'm so happy to share this, and I love your unique and needed show. So thanks for all that you do, Andy. I'm excited to share this with my community too.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you know someone who could use About Progress in their life, will you share this episode with them? Also, if you have the itch to start your own podcast, fill out the intake form in the show notes so I can help you make your podcast dreams come true. Talk to you soon. Oh, I just realized I usually ask people how to say their name, but I already know how to say your name. So
great. Yeah.
That's why I didn't have to ask.
Yeah. Well, people get Packer wrong all the time. So
how do they say it?
Packard.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's kind of silly.